Good morning, everyone. So it's me, Mr. Harmon. We're back again, and we're going to start doing some World War II, which many of you have been looking forward to. So on the screen now, you should have my PowerPoint up, and that PowerPoint, oops, excuse me, sorry about that. My PowerPoint, I'm going to start off with some of the themes for this chapter. And as you can see, and you probably should be noting, the four themes from the textbook are cultural interaction, or our culture from GPEX, political, economic, and human environment interactions. So just a reminder that, remember, we replace human environment interaction as geography, okay? So look at the cultural interaction one first. Attitudes about the superiority or inferiority of a certain race, racial, religious, or cultural groups have provoked tension, violence, and other conflict throughout history. So I took this directly from the book, but looking at World War II, we can't look at this conflict without taking into account the hatred and the amount of dehumanization that took place in lots of different places. So we're going to check that out this time. Political systems, the quest for world prestige and power. We have talked about prestige and power driving and influencing leaders for a long time in our history class, okay? And then you can see it continues on. A need for natural resources, the desire to conquer enemies, a wish to unite people of the same ethnic or racial heritage. These are the same kinds of themes that we've been looking at in trends throughout our history class in September. Okay. Economic systems. Nations have sometimes sought to obtain the raw materials or other resources they need for industrial growth. So we know that Great Britain was labeled as the founding nation of the Industrial Revolution way back in the 1700s, and you know this. But remember that England being an island nation, they had to go out and begin to colonize other places so they could get the raw materials they needed to keep their factories going or to generate the economic cycle that created that wealth in that island nation. Japan is going to be very similar. It's just going to be a different time frame. We're going to see that trend as well. Okay. Human environment interaction. Advances in technology have increased the destructive effects of war on people and on the regions in which they live. Now, you know this because we've been talking about World War I and those weapons of mass destruction that came out of World War I. Well, science and technology and engineers didn't stop at the end of World War I. They wanted to continue to create weapons of mass destruction. And we, America, of course, have the most catastrophic weapon at the end of World War II, and we use it. Okay. All right. So let's continue on. So I'm going to skip the next slide and get right into the road to war. Okay. So again, you should be noting chapter 24. I'm only going to focus on section 2 for this video. And there is a lot. There you see a lot of bullets. And what I have done is, in order for you to kind of get through the textbook quickly, I've basically outlined the entire section for you. And these bullets are from the text. I'll try and make reference to which one you should be noting, and then we'll go from there. All right. So first of all, this one says Japan helped form the League of Nations in the first bullet. But then the second bullet says Japan signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact. So this is an agreement made between a couple ambassadors from two different countries. And I want you to look up Kellogg-Briand Pact. Just do an internet search. But basically, it condemns war. It outlaws war in 1928. Well, as you well can guess, outlawing war is pretty tough to do, right? And the League of Nations was also set up. Remember, that was Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, our president during World War I. He proposed the idea. And remember also, we didn't even agree to go into the League of Nations. But it was an idea of having a League of Nations to create stability and peace. Well, the League of Nations and then the Kellogg-Briand Pact some years later try to outlaw war because they understand the catastrophic casualties and the numbers of death through World War I. Okay. Third bullet, Japan's government's changing. They are extending some rights to their civilians. They're trying to get some voting process created. They're creating political parties. They're definitely moving towards a westernization of their government as well. But here in the fourth bullet, and again, you can't see me pointing to the screen. There it is. There's my cursor. The Washington Conference. So if you were to look at the Washington Conference, what happens is that Japan and the United States and Great Britain and a few others are going to make this treaty, this agreement in the Washington Conference that limits navies. But because of Japan's relatively small size of their naval forces, they get more limited, if you will. Great Britain and America still will have supremacy with their Navy. And some in Japan were very unhappy about this agreement at the Washington Conference, which limits their ability to have a stronger, larger naval force. Remember, Japan is an island country. They need a strong Navy to defend their sea routes. And for them, their imperialistic aims. They want to go other places in Southeast Asia and get natural resources. Keep this in mind, okay? All right, next bullet. Many Japanese are also concerned about events at home, like this one in italicized lettering, disruptive influences of Western culture. So going back to the change in their government, many in Japan were not real happy about becoming more Westernized. They thought they were losing their culture, their history, their belief systems. And so many were upset about this. So you're kind of getting this little cultural conflict or internal conflict. I don't think it's going to be to the level of civil war in Japan, but certainly some disagreements, okay? Now, let's get to this one here, though. These next two bullets here. Japanese leaders believe expansion through conquest, and this one down here. You can see I have bold-face printed militarism again. And remember that expansion through conquest or taking of territories in order to gain what you think you want or need, that is going to be the policy of militarism. And we talked about militarism as being the first letter of Maine, the main causes of World War I. Militarism is going to rise in Japan. They're going to start becoming very nationalistic. They're going to be very aggressive in building their military, and especially after the Washington Conference, when they got limited on their Navy, they want to actually go against that agreement, and they want to start bringing their militarism to their might to power, okay, and their strength in military. And of course, that militarism is going to be combined with a rising nationalistic spirit. So if the Japanese people are trying to push against Westernization, right, they're going to become more nationalistic. We are Japan. We're proud to be Japan, and we're the best in Asia. Let's go and expand our bestness, if you will. That's not even a word, right, throughout Asia, okay? All right, so it says here, Japan's militarism was combined with extreme nationalism. Radical nationalists call for more aggressive military action abroad to acquire territory. I kind of just made a reference to that. Japan's prime minister is assassinated in 1932 when he tried to stop such plans. And army troops carried out more political assassinations. So when a military overthrow of a government takes place, we know that's called a coup, sometimes a coup d'etat, or a strike of the state. Here, the army is not necessarily revolting a revolution, but they're carrying out some of the ideas or the wants of the people, okay? So here on my screen, we've got Japan. You can see how big the Japanese island chain is. This is the easternmost part of Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time. Alaska would be located right about here is where my cursor is, okay? Now we also have the Korean Peninsula, which you know is now right about where Korea is labeled, is split between North and South today, but it's one country at the time. And here's our timestamp. Right here is an area of China known as Manchuria. There you can see the Soviet Union is labeled Mongolia. Here's the capital of China. Here is a city named Nanjing. All right, it's sometimes also known as Nanking. Please keep this city in, oh, where my cursor goes, excuse me. Please keep this city in mind as we go through the lesson together, this one here, okay? But you can start to see, based on this legend, that the Japanese empire is increasing. They're trying to take more locations throughout Southeast Asia and Asia. They're going to start invading and occupying parts of China. They, the Japanese, want to tell the world to maybe say, hey, be alert. We're taking over some territories, okay? All right, next slide. So you remember this political cartoon that we've talked about during our age of imperialism with our different countries here. I'm not going to label them, but you should be able to. But we also know this player here is China, all right? And here was our player of Japan. And during the late 1800s, he seemed to be occupying this notion of like, should I take areas? And remember that the samurai sword is laid down. He doesn't have the weapon in his hand. He doesn't seem to be as aggressive as these other European nations. Well, let's fast forward to the 1930s, and this figure in the cartoon is going to become far more aggressive, okay? It says in the red lettering, I basically just answered that question there, okay? So Japan wants to increase her sphere of influence over other parts of Asia. And this slide just tells you that they're going to seize Manchuria. They're going to take some areas of China. Japan's going to withdraw from that naval limitation treaty from the Washington Conference in 1936. So that treaty only lasted about 8 years. Okay. The Japanese forces are going to clash with Chinese forces. But I've asked you to research the Washington Conference. But now also this is going to be where it says research on your own. Here in this bullet where it says it in red ink, I want you to think about this. It's called the Rape of Nanking. Now, if I was in class with you and I could be face to face and I could set the context and I could create the mature atmosphere we would need, I would show you a video and I would show you the unbelievable brutality the Japanese forces used against their Chinese victims. It's horrific. It is just, it breaks your heart. But because I can't be with you, this is something you should research on your own. If you choose to research the Rape of Nanking, and again, the word rape has such unbelievable, cruel, violent, aggressive connotations behind the word. It's a very aggressive word. The Rape of Nanking is going to lead to 100,000, roughly, deaths, but the severity and the torture they go through, it's horrific. But again, my very first slide talked about the cultural superiority or a sense of inferiority between certain cultures. The amount of dehumanization that comes from the Asian Pacific theater, as well as the Holocaust in Central Europe, dehumanization is going to be a key word we look at, okay? All right, so for right now, what I would like you to do is make sure you write these things down. If you could research the Treaty of Versailles, the Kelly-Briand Pact, Washington Conference, and the Rape of Nanking. Now, when I say research, open up a Google tab, type it in, read a little bit about it, and see if you can't jot down some things. The Treaty of Versailles, remember, is going to be the treaty or agreement at the end of World War I that has certain stipulations and limits really Germany. You need to keep this in mind as we get towards the German piece, okay? And then those other three bullets, Kelly-Briand Pact, Washington Conference, and Rape of Nanking, that is just to learn more. Remember, the idea is to learn, not just jump through some hoops, okay? All right, I'm just doing a little preview there. So I'm going to actually stop here. No, I'll continue. All right, so 24.2 continued. Testing the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is drawn for you in this cartoon. On the muzzle is League of Nations labeled, and it says the Dog of War. And really, this is a really good cartoon I found for you to symbolize that the League of Nations would use economic sanctions, as it says there in boldface print, or perhaps boycotts in which they just wouldn't sell or buy goods from certain nations. But essentially, it was a dog with all bark and no bite. They would say certain things. They would reprimand certain countries, but they really couldn't enforce anything. And one of the major reasons why they couldn't enforce anything was because the United States, which had arguably the first, second, or third strongest military in the world in the 1930s, we didn't join this. And so when there was an action taken by certain nations, if the League of Nations condemned it or said, you shouldn't be doing that, there was nobody to back that up. Japan and Germany are both part of the League of Nations. However, they're going to get out of the League of Nations as they continue on, okay? All right, so I need a preview for just one more second. Yes, okay, so like I thought, 24.2 is the start of the war. And I am starting to get into how Germany is going to get into the war, but I want to stop right there. So we started with Japan. We started with those 4 things for you to research. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to come back with another episode later on. All right, thanks. Have a great day. I hope this helps start getting your minds around 24.2, where Japan was at, also research those 4 things, and then we'll come back together. All right, thanks very much. I'll see you guys later.